Florida State pulls a recruiting shocker. Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back in, everyone, to Locked On Seminoles. I am your host, Brian Smith. Thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. Today's going to be good news for Florida State with their most recent commitment, one that nobody, quite honestly, in the recruiting industry saw coming. We'll talk about that next here at Locked On Seminoles. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as playoffs wind down and sports slow down a little bit this time of year. Remember, FanDuel is still hooking you up and all new customers or anybody that's been with FanDuel with a booster bonus each and every day. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. This is a really unique part of the world of college football. I study it every day. I study recruiting, rosters. I study the transfer portal, etc. Nothing is going to prepare you for these random recruiting shocks. It happens every now and then. Even a program like Florida State's not going to get one this surprising every year. You may go 2 or 3 years without getting one quite like this. CJ Wiley out of Milton High School on the north edge of Atlanta is now a Nole. It's ironic. His high school teammate is the quarterback that's getting ready to go play for Miami. Small world. That being stated, his finalists were LSU, Georgia, and FSU. Everybody thought that he was going to announce for Georgia today. So much so that when CJ made his announcement, I didn't even pay attention because I thought they had zero shot. Zero. He announced, put on the hat. It was quiet. Starts doing the chop. People realize, okay, this isn't some kind of fake out where he puts on the hat and takes it off, puts on Georgia hat, whatever. Nope. I'm just going to Florida State. Like stunned. Now you got to remember, north edge of Atlanta is about as heavy UGA as you can get. It's a recruiting shock on many different levels. Again, nobody saw this one coming. This is a player, I would say conservatively, he's a top 150 kid. More likely, he's a top 50 to 75 recruit. And here's why. Size. That's the first thing. It is the most obvious. It is the most blatant when you meet the young man. It is also the most obvious when you see him move because CJ is very fluid. He's a young man that gets in and out of his breaks really well. He understands how to set up somebody that's a smaller DB as compared to a safety, a bigger player. And he has leverage capabilities. He'll understand when to go underneath the guy in zone or over the top. He knows how to play guys that way. Very well coached. Milton High School, great program. They won 7A state title last year in Georgia, and he was a major component for that. But overall, this is a kid that is just very balanced in his demeanor and everything he does. Whether he's being interviewed, whether he's on the field, whether he's warming up, he is about his business. He stands on business, to use the phrase. This is what I do. No frills. Here I am. This is what I'm going to go out and do to you each and every day. And the way he practices is the way he plays too. Just to be clear, always ready to play. Seen him numerous times, 7-on-7. He's played with Cam Newton and, been really good. But when you see him, the way he moves at that size, again, I can't get away from that. It's unique. He'll be a boundary guy. Don't get me wrong. And that's the position I talk about all the time that Florida State needs to continuously recruit well. This will be the third class in a row. They've got a guy big enough to be the boundary. Doesn't mean he'll always play it, but that's rare. Florida State is not only getting good receivers out, they're getting some dudes. And I'll talk about Elijah Moore here in a second, the kid they got from Good Counsel out of the D.C. area last year, and stacking them. Then, of course, they've got other big receivers on the roster. This is a unique scenario because Florida State could – I don't know if they'll ever have Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson in the same grouping ever again, like two big guys. Like that's about as rare as it gets. But if you're getting one at least every year, you put yourself in a much different situation because the value for a big receiver, you can look at it in the portal. This spring, there were really no big receivers that were elite players. Zero. There were some good ones. The kid that went from Miami to Georgia, ironically, since Georgia got beat out today, was the best. But he was nowhere near a dominant player. Very good, absolutely. But he didn't have the same speed and stuff as some other guys that you would think of. He didn't have Johnny Wilson's overall ability, stuff like that. He's a good player. You're just not going to find him. There were a ton of kids that were 5'11" if you wanted one. How many 6'4" guys did you see with definitive production that had an opportunity to be your number one? Zero. There just aren't very many of them. Most guys that size don't have a lot of suddenness, and they also usually don't have deep speed. The combination of both is very, very rare. CJ's not a pure burner, but he has good speed, and he's just so good at in and out of his breaks that he can beat smaller guys to the spot, and then he's going to outbody him, use his positioning, use his arm length. He's got some really long arms to win battles. Florida State is getting a guy that can be a difference maker. And again, this is one of those recruiting shocks, not just by Florida State levels, for the country. It's probably the biggest shock this year. I don't even know if there's a number two to it. So let's break down what happened a little bit as well. Visits have taken place. Florida State gets the last one. And I've been building up, and so did everybody else in the Florida State media, about this June 21st recruiting weekend. That's the Friday that it all started. And you just don't know. You have to just wait for the visits to be over. And it's kind of boring as a Florida State guy waiting for all these visits. I'm sure the people out there understand what I'm saying. Like anybody following Florida State, like, oh, why do they got to do it the last weekend? Because that's going to just take forever to get the commitments. I get it. It's boring for me too. That's the way it worked. But the getting the last weekend paid dividends. They'd recruited him forever, building relationships. I say this all the time across the Locked On Podcast Network. Players pick coaches, not schools, period. I don't care how much you like or dislike that. It is a fact. Florida State's relationship building with CJ took hold earlier. That is the key here. Something that I give credit to Florida State as much, honestly, to think about it, probably more than any other program in the country. And I follow everybody. I cover, schools across the South. I'll go to California. I go all over the place. Florida State finds somebody they like. They do not care what their ranking is. They do not care what grade he is in. They do not care what high school he is from. They like him. They like him. This staff does it differently than any other school. And I don't know how to rate them because there's such an outlier. It's very unusual. I just happen to cover Florida State, but it's unique. They liked Wiley early on. They got on him. They've recruited him ever since. And he talked about it in his press conference. Good for him. Good for Florida State. And they went out that way. Obviously, the visit went well, too. You have to finish to make that happen. One other note, as I briefly mentioned a few moments ago, CJ's a pretty quiet kid. Yes, sir, no, sir. Not an emotional guy. You ask him a question, he gives you an answer. Doesn't matter if it's a high-level question, a basic one, you're going to get the same facial expression. You're going to get the same tone, the same level of interest in the answer. It doesn't matter. He is straight down the middle. I think he had a lot of people fooled just because it's easy to pick Georgia, myself included. When you hear any rumblings about, hey, Georgia really wants this kid. If it's an in-state player in Georgia, it is rare that Kirby doesn't get them if it's one of his top 5, 6 guys, something like that. He was the number one guy they wanted, like the big receiver from everything that I had heard. So I think it's easy just to go with, hey, he's going to pick Georgia. 9 times out of 10, that ends up being right. It's the default answer. But again, relationships, consistency with it, and that final visit weekend, the Noles got the last visit, they all went out. Next, here at Locked On Seminoles, we're going to talk about what this means for the class, what's up next for Florida State, including Tramel Jones and everything else that's going on with this year's recruiting class. Next, here on Locked On Seminoles. FanDuel. I love sports, and I love them so much I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games. And the sports aren't exactly coming around like they are in other times of the year. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus every day. That's right. There's something for everyone each and every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/locked-on and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Now that they have Wiley in the fold, what are we looking at here overall? Is it an opportunity to look at it from, okay, you got a stud receiver, and he flat out is. Do we get picky? Do we go numbers? Whatever. This is how I look at it. I'm not saying this is what Florida State's going to do. They got a tremendous wide receiver class last year. And I mentioned a moment ago, Elijah Moore. He's going to come up here in just a second. So you can be picky if you want. But this is a tremendous year for receivers down south. It almost is every year. Florida State's located about as central to it as you can be. They're 5 hours from Atlanta. They're like 8 hours from Miami. You're maybe 5.5 hours, 6 hours from New Orleans. You are in a centralized location to get top receivers. So what do I think they should do? I think they should be pretty picky, but I think in today's world with Florida State's offensive scheme, you need 3 receivers in every class. Ideally, this is the hardest thing, you need a big, athletic, jumbo athlete type that can move around, play boundary in another spot. Well, Florida State just got that. If you get that back-to-back classes, and again, Elijah Moore's the kid I'm going to compare him with, then you can get really creative. This is where you can beat teams up, and this is what Florida State did in 2023. Now, Keon was an outside guy, obviously very mobile. He even returned punts. I don't know if CJ will do that or not. We'll wait and see. But Keon could do a lot of things. They could play him in the slot. They could play him boundary. They could play him whatever he wanted. Part of that's him taking the time to learn the playbook. There's no shortcut there. If you don't know the plays, and I mean know them stone cold, it doesn't work. But physically, he could move around. CJ can do that. But with last year's class, they got 4 really good receivers, and they got a great tight end as well as Landon Thomas, about as good a group tight end wide receiver there was in the country that the Noles signed. If you add him, and let's just say hypothetically, they come up short by my measurements, and they only sign 1 more receiver. Just 1. Even if it's a slot, which is by far the easiest position to get out of the 3 receiver spots. Again, slot is easiest, flanker somewhat easy, but boundary is by far the hardest because it's just about sheer size. There's only so many of them. It's almost like D-tackle. They're not a whole lot. They're a premium. They already got that. I think you should take the elite kid, whoever it is, and then you just get super picky if you take a 3rd one. Don't waste that spot. Go defense, go offensive tackle, something of that nature. That's my gut. I don't know what their board says. I don't know how many they would want. But based on the background that Norvell and his staff had, too many guys probably have been passed in the last 10 years that Florida State could have got. They probably should have recruited this guy or that guy, whatever. I'm not worried about that now. Let's be clear. They'll figure it out. But if they want to get 1 kid, it's another good receiver based on what they've gotten. Hakeem, Elijah Moore, CJ Wiley, you've got plenty of size. There probably aren't 3 programs in the country that have gotten 3 guys like that can play flanker or boundary and be dominant with that size that were elite recruits and all that in the last 3 years. Why do I keep bringing up Elijah Moore? If you have not looked it up, I don't care if you hate Twitter or X or whatever, do it anyway. Repeat, do it anyway. Go look up Elijah Moore and find the videos. Find the videos. He can play. There's a couple of videos of him working out at Florida State, catching one-hand passes, this and that. He is so fluid, it's ridiculous. I remember laughing when I was talking about Florida State's class, even before it signed, about how good he was. I'm like, why in the world is he ranked a 3-star player? He's in D.C., which is elite football, period. Per capita, one of the best areas in the country for placing players into this thing they call the National Football League. That's a good barometer. And he had a bunch of offers, and he had size and great hands. Some of the people didn't have him anything other than a 3-star. Whatever. I knew better. So did Florida State, and they took him early. Smart move. Now you're getting Wiley to go with that, and now you can start mixing and matching. Whichever player ends up learning the playbook and earning it, because that's the Florida State way, they'll be the guy that moves around. Now, you can still be just a dominant boundary guy. There's nothing wrong with that. More than likely, with Norvell and his staff, they'll find different ways to move these guys around. And everybody always tells kids in recruiting, hey, we're going to move you. They want to. But again, there's just no shortcut. Must know the playbook. And I mean stone cold to do that stuff. You can't run tempo, especially, and waste time. And quarterback, you see, like before a play, quarterback's like, hey, what are you doing? Go over here. You're wasting time. The defense getting set, and they're resting. Number one reason you want to run tempo is because they're sucking air. It is harder to play defense than it is to play offense by a mile. Must know the playbook stone cold just for that alone. Whoever does that out of those three is going to be the most likely to be a big-time guy, maybe first-round pick. But again, Hakeem, Elijah, and now CJ, name another program that's gotten three guys with that raw size, with that raw speed, all the intangibles that you're looking for, like Florida State. Might be a couple, but I'm not sure. I'd have to look into it. I'm still stunned that they got CJ, so we'll see. But it's interesting. Also of note, it's not like Florida State hasn't gotten some really athletic kids in the forefront, what you're used to. Remember the Bowden era? They always had the 5'11 kid that made 20 guys miss, it seemed like. Got a kid last year in Wayne McCoy. BJ Gibson last year. Those guys are not fun to deal with. And now, because of the big receivers, and you also have Landon Thomas, who had offers from everybody. Remember seeing him when he was 14 years old, and I said, I would take him right now. Literally, you have all these matchup problems. Who do you double? So when you run the most generic, everybody in the stadium can see it coming screen to Lil Wayne, to BJ, whoever it is, if you're doubling to another guy, if you're shading coverage, if you're moving your linebacker towards a boundary receiver, whatever, that's one less player you got to worry about. And the first guy misses, it's off to the races. That's why getting players like this matters. It's not just them making a big-time play. It's helping everybody around. It circumvents everything that you try to do as an offense, and you can just be simplistic and beat the bejesus out of your opponent. Not many teams will have that ability. Florida State obviously is recruiting quarterback well. I'm not real worried about that. It looks like from everything, and he just checked in at the Rivals 5-star in Jacksonville, but Tramel Jones was doing the chop and all that. He's going to Florida State, barring another just shocker here. It'll be 3 years in a row you've gotten a quarterback that you really wanted. Florida State's passing game, if something doesn't work out over the next several years, it's going to have to be injury. Anybody that doesn't trust in Florida State's offensive ingenuity, they haven't been watching very much. Either that or they just hate Florida State and they can't say it. I'm just a guy that follows college football, and I tell it like it is. If I like a team or I hate a team, I'm still going to tell it like it is. And with Florida State, it's a team I've followed forever. This is one of the most balanced rosters in terms of the skill spots, DB and receiver. They've had even since the Bowden era. Even that 2013 team, this receiver group and DB group moving forward starting next season, the DB group's already there, will be about as good as anywhere in the country. Still a little curious about this year. They got some guys that got to prove it, but they got the size and athleticism. Starting in 25, Florida State's just going to be loaded across the board at the offensive skill spots. They could put up a lot of points. So this is fascinating to me, and I think it's a lot of fun for Florida State fans, especially people my age. I'm 50. Could they come back around and be that team that everybody fears to play offensively? When you're getting guys like Wiley, and he's the third year in a row you get a big receiver that can move around, look, it's not that hard. If they come out and they learn the offense and do what they're supposed to, and of course get a little luck with injuries, they can throw it around and just be a dynamic offense. It's been a while since Florida State's been that style. Not saying they're not going to line it up and play power football and be balanced. They still will. But if they want to go fast break offense, they're going to be able to. Last year's receiver class was a great start. This is the first commitment. And again, they can be picky. Florida State is in a great spot with wide receiver recruiting because the combination of 24 and 25 is going to be hard to beat. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about NIL and how it impacts Florida State with a situation that I just learned about and kind of why you just can't tell with recruiting as well. That's next here on Locked On Seminoles. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance: superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to bring home that win each and every time. Keep your ride or die alive at ebay.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions applied. eBay's Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Let's use CJ Wiley's visit as the barometer here. That's like a 4-year relationship. That was the icing on the cake for him. Again, he kind of spoiled it in the sense of nobody can read him, myself included. I've interviewed him multiple times. He fooled everybody, picks Florida State. But this is also very important for the following reason. Are you bought into the program, or are you bought into the money? This is something I've been pondering for a while, and I'm going to combine a couple of things. So this may be a little convoluted, but it's reality. I know players that pick schools strictly because of NIL. I know players that pick schools because NIL got them over the top, etc. A buddy of mine and I had a conversation, and he's followed recruiting even longer than I have, about the following. He says, if you give a young man a bunch of money just to sign before he's ever physically shown up to campus, you got to worry about the commitment. It's a rough spot for college coaches, even if they have the financial means from their NIL collective to make it happen. Which player do you do it with? Does it irritate other recruits? They're going to talk in the locker room. No matter what you tell them to do, immediately it will happen. Probably before they get there. And players will transfer. It is a time bomb no matter what path you go. If you pay too much, somebody gets mad they didn't get enough. If you don't pay enough, somebody's mad you didn't pay their buddy. No matter what, when money is involved, it creates problems, not just in college football, but throughout life. Just a fact. Recently, I found out about a player that's going to pick a different school, and they're offering a bunch more money than Florida State. It's a different recruit, obviously, than CJ Wiley, but here's the deal. It's not that Florida State did anything wrong. It's just they got outbid, like by a mile. When I found out what Florida State was offering, it was really a substantial sum, and it was more than I thought he would end up getting from anybody. And the other school still offered over twice what Florida State did. Again, here's the key. Florida State did not give a bad offer. The other school just went all in. Now, this isn't going to be public information. They're not going to talk about it during their announcement or anything else. It's awkward. So here's a little nugget. No matter how much you get mad, whether it's Florida State or any other school, when they win a recruitment or lose a recruitment, note that sometimes the money is so much at another school, it derails everything. Obviously, that did not happen in the CJ Wiley situation, and I have no idea what his NIL package was. None. Zero idea. But in some other ones, Florida State might lose a kid that you thought, well, what happened? You're not going to know the details. That's going to irritate fans that follow recruiting like crazy. I'm telling you, you are not going to know the details, and it is what it is. It's one of the reasons that I don't make predictions with recruiting very much, but when I got this information like straight from the horse's mouth, I'm like, holy moly, had no idea it was that kind of deal. That's crazy. Sometimes you just don't win, and it is what it is. The key here is still the same. You got to coach your players and make them better after they're on campus, and you got to mitigate the problems that the NIL is going to create in your locker room. So far, obviously, Florida State has done a great job with that. That's why they ended up winning the ACC last year. Thank you very much for making this your first listen each and every day. Everybody come back. I will see you again tomorrow.